In the 1930s, the renowned writer Paul Brunton traveled to the ashram of Ramana Maharshi on the mountain of Arunachala. The following is the third part in a series from his account of that visit from A Search in Secret India, the chapter entitled Tablets of a Forgotten Truth. My pen would wander on to some account of the scenic life around me, and into further record of many talks with the Maharishi. But it is now time to draw this chronicle to a close. I study him intently, and gradually come to see in him the child of a remote past, when the discovery of spiritual truth was reckoned of no less value than is the discovery of a gold mine today. It dawns on me with increasing force that in this quiet and obscure corner of South India, I have been led to one of the last of India's spiritual supermen. The serene figure of this living sage brings the legendary figures of his country's ancient rishis nearer to me. One senses that the most wonderful part of this man is withheld. His deepest soul, which one instinctively recognizes as being loaded with rich wisdom, eludes one. At times he still remains curiously aloof, and at other times the kindly benediction of his interior grace binds me to him with hoops of steel. I learn to submit to the enigma of his personality and to accept him as I find him. But if, humanly speaking, he is well insulated against outside contacts, whoever discovers the requisite Ariadne's thread can walk the inner path leading to spiritual contact with him. And I like him greatly because he is so simple and modest, when an atmosphere of authentic greatness lies so palpably around him, because he makes no claims to occult powers and hierophantic knowledge to impress the mystery-loving nature of his countrymen, and because he is so totally without any traces of pretension that he strongly resists every effort to canonize him during his lifetime. It seems to me that the presence of men like the Maharishi ensures the continuity down history of a divine message from regions not easily accessible to us all. It seems to me, further, that one must accept the fact that such a sage comes to reveal something to us, not to argue anything with us. He brings in no supernatural power and demands no blind religious faith. The sublime spirituality of the Maharishi's atmosphere and the rational self-questioning of his philosophy find but a faint echo in yonder temple. Even the word God is rarely on his lips. He avoids the dark and debatable waters of wizardry in which so many promising voyages have ended in shipwreck. He simply puts forward a way of self-analysis, which can be practiced irrespective of any ancient or modern theories and beliefs which one may hold, a way that will finally lead man to true self-understanding. I return hastily from an exploration of some usually veiled sanctuaries of the great temple and enter the hall when the evening meditation period has run out half its life. I slip quietly to the floor and straightway assume my regular meditation posture. In a few seconds, I compose myself and bring all wandering thoughts to a strong center. An intense interiorization of consciousness comes with the closing of eyes. The Maharishi's seated form floats in a vivid manner before my mind's eye. Following his frequently repeated instruction, I endeavor to pierce through the mental picture into that which is formless, his real being and inner nature, his soul. To my surprise, the effort meets with almost instantaneous success, and the picture disappears again, leaving me with nothing more than a strongly felt sense of his intimate presence. The mental questionings, which have marked most of my earlier meditations, have lately begun to cease. I have repeatedly interrogated my consciousness of physical, emotional, and mental sensations in turn, but dissatisfied in the quest of self, have eventually left them all. I have then applied the attention of consciousness to its own center, striving to become aware of its place of origin. Now comes the supreme moment. In that concentration of stillness, the mind withdrawn into itself, one's familiar world begins to fade off into shadowy vagueness. One is apparently environed for a while by sheer nothingness, having arrived at a kind of mental blank wall. And one has to be as intense as possible to maintain one's fixed attention. But how hard to leave the lazy dalliance of our surface life and draw the mind inwards to a pinpoint of concentration. Tonight, I flash swiftly to this point with barely a skirmish against the continuous sequence of thoughts which usually play the prelude to its arrival. Some new and powerful force comes into dynamic action within my inner world and bears me inwards with resistless speed. The first great battle is over, almost without a stroke, and a pleasurable, happy, easeful feeling succeeds its high tension. In the next stage, I stand apart from the intellect, conscious that it is thinking, but warned by an intuitive voice that it is merely an instrument. I watch these thoughts with a weird detachment. The power to think, which has hitherto been a matter for merely ordinary pride, now becomes a thing from which to escape. For I perceive with startling clarity that I have been its unconscious captive. There follows the sudden desire to stand outside the intellect and just be. I want to dive into a place deeper than thought. I want to know what it will feel like to deliver myself from the constant bondage of the brain, but to do so with all my attention awake and alert. It is strange enough to be able to stand aside and watch the very action of the brain as though it were someone else's, and to see how thoughts take their rise and then die. But it is stranger still to realize intuitively that one is about to penetrate into the mysteries which hide in the innermost recesses of man's soul. I feel like some Columbus about to land on an uncharted continent. A perfectly controlled and subdued anticipation quietly thrills me. But how to divorce oneself from the age-old tyranny of thoughts? I remember that the Maharishi has never suggested that I should attempt to force the stoppage of thinking. Trace the thought to its place of origin, is his reiterated counsel. Watch for the real self to reveal itself, and then your thoughts will die down of their own accord. So, feeling that I have found the birthplace of thinking, I let go of the powerfully positive attitude which has brought my attention to this point and surrender myself to complete passivity, yet still keeping as intently watchful as a snake of its prey. This poised condition reigns until I discover the correctness of the sage's prophecy. The waves of thought naturally begin to diminish. The workings of logical, rational sense drop towards 0 point. The strangest sensation I've experienced till now grips me. Time seems to reel dizzily as the antennae of my rapidly growing intuition begin to reach out into the unknown. The reports of my bodily senses are no longer heard, felt, remembered. I know that at any moment I shall be standing outside things, on the very edge of the world's secret. Finally, it happens. Thought is extinguished like a snuffed candle. The intellect withdraws into its real ground, that is, consciousness working unhindered by thoughts. I perceive what I have suspected for some time, and what the Maharishi has confidently affirmed, that the mind takes its rise in a transcendental source. The brain has passed into a state of complete suspension, as it does in deep sleep, yet there is not the slightest loss of consciousness. I remain perfectly calm and fully aware of who I am and what is occurring. Yet my sense of awareness has been drawn out of the narrow confines of the separate personality. It has turned into something sublimely all-embracing. Self still exists, but it is a changed, radiant self. For something that is far superior to the unimportant personality which I was, some deeper, diviner being rises into consciousness and becomes me. With it arrives an amazing new sense of absolute freedom, for thought is like a loom shuttle, which is always going to and fro, and to be freed from its tyrannical motion is to step out of prison into the open air. I find myself outside the rim of world consciousness. The planet which has so far harbored me disappears. I am in the midst of an ocean of blazing light. The latter, I feel rather than think, is the primeval stuff out of which worlds are created, the first state of matter. It stretches away into untellable, infinite space, incredibly alive. I touch, as in a flash, the meaning of this mysterious universal drama which is being enacted in space, and then return to the primal point of my being. I, the new I, rest in the lap of holy bliss. I have drunk the platonic cup of Lethe, so that yesterday's bitter memories and tomorrow's anxious cares have disappeared completely. I have attained a divine liberty and an almost indescribable felicity. My arms embrace all creation with profound sympathy, for I understand in the deepest possible way that to know all is not merely to pardon all, but to love all. My heart is remolded in rapture. How shall I record these experiences through which I next pass, when they are too delicate for the touch of my pen? Yet the starry truths which I learn may be translated into the language of earth, and the effort will not be a vain one. So I seek all too roughly to bring back some memorials of the wonderful archaic world which stretches out, untracked and unpathed, behind the human mind. I return to this mundane sphere, impelled by a force which I cannot resist. By slow, unhurried stages, I become aware of my surroundings. I discover that I am sitting in the hall of the Maharishi and that it is apparently deserted. My eyes catch sight of the hermitage clock, and I realize that the inmates must be in the dining room at their evening meal. And then I become aware of someone on my left. It is the 75-year-old ex-station master who is squatting close beside me on the floor, with his gaze turned benevolently on me. "You have been in a spiritual trance for nearly 2 hours," he informs me. His face, seamed with years and lined with old cares, breaks into smiles as though he rejoices in my own happiness. I endeavor to make some reply, but discover to my astonishment that my power of speech has gone. Not for almost 15 minutes do I recover it. Meanwhile, the old man supplements the further statement. "The Maharishi watched you closely all the time. I believe his thoughts guided you." When the sage returns to the hall, those who follow him take up their positions for the short interval which precedes the final retirement for the night. He raises himself up on the divan and crosses his legs. Then, resting an elbow on the right thigh, he holds his chin within the upright hand, 2 fingers covering his cheek. Our eyes meet across the intervening space, and he continues to look intently at me. And when the attendant lowers the wicks of the hall's lamps, following the customary nightly practice, I am struck once again by the strange luster in the Maharishi's calm eyes. They glow like twin stars through the half-darkness. I remind myself that never have I met any man's eyes as remarkable as those of this last descendant of India's rishis. Insofar as the human eyes can mirror divine power, it is a fact that the sages do that. The heavily scented incense smoke rises in soft spirals while I watch those eyes that never flicker. During the 40 minutes which pass so strangely, I say nothing to him, and he says nothing to me. What use are words? We now understand each other better without them. For in this profound silence, our minds approach a beautiful harmony, and in this optic telegraphy, I receive a clear, unuttered message. Now that I have caught a wonderful and memorable glimpse of the Maharishi's viewpoint on life, my own inner life has begun to mingle with his. When he leaves me, I stand at the door and look up at the hill of the holy beacon, Arunachala, the sacred red mountain, as the people of the countryside prefer to call it. It has become the colorful background of all my existence. Always I have but to raise my eyes from whatever I am doing, whether eating, walking, talking, or meditating, and there is its strange, flat-headed shape confronting me in the open or through a window. It is somehow inescapable in this place, but the strange spell it throws over me is more inescapable still. I begin to wonder whether this queer, solitary peak has enchanted me. There is a local tradition that it is entirely hollow, and that in its interior dwell several great spiritual beings who are invisible to mortal gaze. But I disdain the story as a childish legend. And yet this lonely hill holds me in a powerful thrall, despite the fact that I have seen others infinitely more attractive. This rugged piece of nature, with its red laterite boulders tumbled about in disorderly masses and glowing like dull fire in the sunlight, possesses a strong personality which emanates a palpable, awe-creating influence. With the fall of dusk, I take my farewells of everyone except the Maharishi. I feel quietly content because my battle for spiritual certitude has been won, and because I have won it without sacrificing my dearly held rationalism for a blind credulity. Yet when the Maharishi comes to the courtyard with me a little later, my contentment suddenly deserts me. This man has strangely conquered me, and it deeply affects my feelings to leave him. He has grappled me to his own soul with unseen hooks which are harder than steel, although he has sought only to restore a man to himself, to set him free and not to enslave him. He has taken me into the benign presence of my spiritual self and helped me, dull Westerner that I am, to translate a meaningless term into a living and blissful experience. I linger over our parting, unable to express the profound emotions which move me. The indigo sky is strewn with stars, which cluster in countless thousands close over our heads. The rising moon is a thin crescent disk of silver light. On our left, the evening fireflies are making the compound grove radiant, and above them the plumed heads of tall palms stand out in black silhouette against the sky. My adventure in self-metamorphosis is over, but the turning axle of time will bring me back to this place, I know. I raise my palms and close them together in the customary salutation, and then mutter a brief goodbye. The sage smiles and looks at me fixedly, but says not a word. One last look towards the Maharishi, One last glimpse by dim lantern light of a tall copper-skinned figure with lustrous eyes. Another farewell gesture on my part, a slight wave of his right hand in response, and we part. I climb into the waiting bullock cart. The driver swishes his whip. The obedient creatures turn out of the courtyard into the rough path, and then trot briskly away into the jasmine-scented tropic night. Years later, in 1949, someone who was visiting the ashram wrote to PB. "I was happy to deliver your message to the Maharishi," he smiled. "I asked him if he had a message for you. He replied, 'What is there to say when heart speaks to heart?'" Please visit us at www.paulbrunton.org and also at www.pbarchives.org. Paul Brunton's books are available at larsonpublications.com. For more information about Ramana Maharshi, visit the ashram's website at sriramana.maharshi.org.